Meeting to order. We are meeting in public. Welcome to meeting number 119 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Whether participating in person or by Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee at the meeting convened on October 21st, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of the recent reforms to the International Student Program. Before I welcome the witnesses, I would love to welcome, I saw Madam Julie, here we go. Yeah, Jerowitz, welcome to the committee. I know immigration is, you're very passionate about immigration and chairing the Liberal Caucus on immigration, so welcome. Now is my turn on behalf of the committee members. Now I would like to welcome the witnesses for today's meeting. From the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing, with us we have John Daniel Jacob. Welcome, Mr. Jacob. From the DIA at the Toronto Metropolitan University, we have the Director Policy and Research by video conference, Mr. Andre Cote. Welcome. And also from my own part of the Canada, from Vancouver Community College, we have President and Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Ajay Patel. Mr. Patel, welcome to the committee. Now up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with the rounds of questions. Before I welcome Mr. Jacob, I want to remind all honorable members. Julie, you're new to the committee, and any honorable member that's asking questions to the witnesses, sometimes the honorable member fairly feels that that the witness is going too long. The honorable member will raise the hand, and I will stop the watch, and I will start the watch again once the honorable members start to speak. And I would also request the witnesses, if they can keep an eye on the honorable member that's asking questions, so when the hand is raised, that is a signal to wrap up. So I don't want to be interruption in between the conversations, because otherwise I will be taking more time from the members if I need to intervene. So that works very well with this committee. With this, now I would love to welcome Mr. Jacob. You have 5 minutes for your opening statements. Please go ahead.
Alors, bon après-midi tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Jacob, I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Associations of Schools of Nursing. I am new in the position. I was appointed at the beginning of November. My previous role was as the director at the School of Nursing at the University of Ottawa. And although I will provide a pan-Canadian perspective on this issue, I also have some hands-on experience related to the admission of international students in nursing programs. For context, the Canadian Associations of Schools of Nursing, or CASN, is a national voluntary association that is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people, and that represents the baccalaureate and graduate education programs in nursing. These are entry to practice programs for registered nurses and nurse practitioners, as well as programs that result in masters and PhDs in nursing. The organization's mission is to support the delivery of high-quality nursing education through accreditations or accreditation of schools and their respective nursing programs, the creation of standards, as well as resources and continuing education that promotes excellence in teaching, and by representing nursing education nationally, which is why I am before you today. International students make up relatively small percentage of enrollments in nursing programs. The most recent data we have comes from Statistics Canada prior to COVID or prior to the pandemic, which was around 2.6 to 4.7% of enrollments were of international students in nursing programs. CASN collects information from schools of nursing each year on the number of applications, admissions, enrollments of students and graduates from nursing programs. Unfortunately, we currently do not monitor the number of applications and enrollments from international students. However, it is possible to look at the global effects of the reforms when considering their full impact on nursing programs, both direct and indirect. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, Canada experienced an acute nursing shortage, which continues to impact healthcare today. In response to this acute need for nurses, provincial governments called on an increase in nursing seats in compressed programs across Canada. This short-term provincial funding allowed schools to respond to this crisis by increasing seats in most nursing programs, including registered or licensed practical nursing programs, registered nursing programs, and nurse practitioner programs. There's a direct tension between the provincial funding for nursing seats and regulatory reforms, which impacts budgets at universities and colleges overall. The overall decrease in budgets end up affecting nursing schools and their programs by increasing the workloads of smaller numbers of faculties and staff, and diminish supports and services to both professors and students. For example, mental health services and writing centers. It's important to mention that the international student cap and other related regulatory changes are felt more in rural communities and institutions. For example, some universities and colleges in Atlantic Canada have higher proportions of international students. Beyond the financial implications for schools, we can see in certain locations a reliance on international students or student graduates in nursing to fill shortages in local healthcare institutions. This is particularly true of programs who operate in linguistic minority contexts and rely on international students to meet their increasingly diverse health industry and population needs. Current reforms are therefore significantly affecting provinces' health human resource needs and increasing vulnerability of precarious yet essential nursing programs. Short term, the decisions affect viability of programs, such as programs closures, layoffs, hiring freezes, and so on. And long term, they affect academic institutions' capacity to address the increasing needs of diverse population. It's also important to note that overall, current international enrollment doesn't even meet the new threshold set by governments, suggesting a deterring effect on international students' willingness to study in Canada following the reform. Another impact of the reform is on the number of master's and PhD students in nursing. Canada has a shortage of PhDs and master's prepared nurses. Highlights from our national survey, our national faculty and student survey show that in 2023, schools were unable to fill 78 permanent and long-term contract faculty positions. Schools projected need to hire 200 permanent and 110 long-term contract faculty positions in 2024. 77 permanent faculty retired in 2023. And roughly 40% of schools reported a lack of nurses with PhDs or master's degrees applying to faculty positions. Delivery of a sustainable education program or of education programs and creation of sustainable workforce requires careful consideration from institutions and provincial and federal governments. All students, including international students, should enter a nursing program that has the physical and human resources, including classroom space, lab equipment, clinical placements for high-quality educational experience, successful program completion, and students that are well positioned to pass the registration exam. Graduate education in nursing is required for most faculty positions within schools of nursing and therefore has a direct impact on the sustainability of the nursing workforce. Happy to take some questions afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob. 6 minutes and 34 seconds. Now we will go to the next. We're going to go to Mr. Cote for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, and to the committee for inviting me to speak. So my name is André Cote. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the DAIS, which is a think tank at Toronto Metropolitan University. In a past life, I was also a senior advisor to an Ontario higher education minister, so I sort of bring that perspective as well. Just a quick word about the DAIS. So we're based out of Toronto Metropolitan University, and our work really focuses on public policy at the intersection of education, technology, and democracy. Those are kind of our three big realms. So as part of that, we've been doing a bunch of work on international education, including a project we launched in the spring to think about the future of international education in Canada, really in the wake of the January announcement that I think safe to say threw the system into crisis a little bit, and was, of course, the result of the huge surge in international enrollments and whatnot. So this project was with the Canadian Standards Association Public Policy Centre and a few other partners. And the aim, to a large extent, was research, but also hosting roundtables with a wide array of other partner stakeholders in this space. And so my remarks will be informed by a bunch of the work we've been doing there. And the report is to be released soon as well. So I'll just hit a few quick points and then happy to elaborate further in the questions. I think a first one is we need to really focus on what we have to do to fix Canada's international education system for the future, rather than assigning blame for the past. I think it's very understandable, the great frustration and anger I've certainly heard from many stakeholders in the space about what's happened over the past year. But I mean, I think and someone who's been in this space for 10 or observing for 10 years or so, there is plenty of blame to go around, and frankly, some of this was foreseeable years back. And so certainly some of this is on the federal government, but also a large share on the provinces, certain provinces in particular who jointly manage the system, the universities and colleges, many of whom chose to pursue really aggressive growth strategies, and then many other players in the system who had a real vested interest in this surge in growth, and so who contributed. And so I just think the first point is, rather than dwelling on that, we really need to focus our energies on fixing the system to benefit Canada, and also importantly, doing right by foreign students coming to Canada. That's point one. Point two is, I think and we are broadly supportive of the government's reforms. I'll add some caveats in a moment, but I think what's been tough this year is because they've come in these various announcements over time, from January through the spring to another in September, it's been tough to gather this sort of full picture. But I think when you look at the key reform, certainly was around the study permitting system. And I think what the reforms have done is shift from what was a somewhat laissez-faire, demand-driven model to a right-sized and capped supply system linked to the temporary residence targets in the levels plan. I think this makes sense to me. You can quibble about the numbers and the approach, but it broadly brings some structure and that sort of sustainability piece that's been talked about. I think also measures to tighten up postgraduate work permit eligibility, to put in place more system integrity and accountability mechanisms, the attestation letters, more levers for overseeing DLIs, the changes to the working hours policy, which were way too high at the 40 hours, and increasing the costs of living asset requirements. Again, you can quibble over the numbers, but I think as a broad package, some things that were needed to be done. Third, though, I would say, my sense is the federal reforms have overstepped into some domains that are better managed by the provinces and by the post-secondary institutions. I think the particular areas of concerns are around the reforms to tie postgraduate work permit eligibility for colleges to in-demand programs, and also the changes around graduate students, including incorporating them in the cap and things that seemed reasonably minor, like limiting work eligibility to spouses of grad students in shorter programs. I think one aspect is these reforms are really using immigration levers to, in some regards, dictate post-secondary policy, which I think is problematic. That should largely be left to the provinces. But they're also very blunt instruments for trying to do these things. And I think, frankly, on the postgraduate work permit eligibility, for example, is IRCC best placed to be forecasting labor market needs across the country or identifying qualifying programs? Many stakeholders we talked to had concerns with this piece. So I think, going forward, our recommendation would be this should be done in conjunction with, or frankly, potentially deferred to the provinces in future. So something we can dig into. We see them as much better equipped to understand local labor markets, regional development needs, as well as obviously overseeing post-secondary policy. The fourth point is, so the ISP is a jointly run system, and there needs to be much better coordination and consultation. It has to be said, this crisis is to a large extent a failure of federalism, where the feds and the provinces have just not worked closely enough together on this. And I think a lot of the frustration with the reforms this year have boiled down to a perceived sort of lack of consultation among stakeholders in many quarters. And so I think, fixing the system will require coordinated actions in a number of areas that we get into in our reports, ensuring integrity and consumer protection in recruitment, enhancing oversight and quality assurance of DLIs, improving academic supports and services for international students, and more. And so I can get into this a little bit more in the questions. And then the last point, efforts to renew the system should be built upon a new and long-term international education strategy, and also efforts or a plan to rebuild Brand Canada internationally. In short, many people we've talked to express this view that Canada has kind of lost its way on international education, a system that has gradually become overly driven by driving short-term revenues rather than national objectives and quality outcomes for students. So we need a refreshed vision. We need clearer objectives and a refreshed strategy. It should be informed by and guided by an extensive consultation process. It should reflect this sort of dramatically changed environment, aligning post-secondary goals with our broader national objectives in immigration, in labor markets, regional development, global affairs. And I think lastly, it needs to reconcile the damage that we've done to our brand internationally over the past year, and think about coordinated approaches for rebuilding Canada's reputation and the trust of prospective students overseas who were very high on Canada, and the survey data we're seeing is that's eroded reasonably quickly. So thank you very much, and happy to elaborate more during the question period.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cote. 7 minutes, 24 seconds. So, Mr. Patel, I'm not going to stop you, but the signal is very clear because I don't want to cut the witnesses off and because I want the message to be clearly delivered to the committee members. So, but please...
Apologies, Chair.
No problem. So now we will go to Mr. Patel for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, Mr. Patel.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Chair Dhaliwal, for the opportunity to present on behalf of Vancouver Community College. We are the traditional unceded territory, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people who have been stewards of these lands since time immemorial. As mentioned, I am the president of Vancouver Community College, but I'd like to share with you a few other roles I hold. I'm a board member of Invest Vancouver Management Board. That's a standing committee of the Metro Vancouver Regional District, a member and a board executive member for Colleges and Institutes Canada, a trustee for World Education Services, a past chair for the Canadian Bureau for International Education, an executive member for BC Colleges, as well as a board member for the BC Council on International Education. And prior to my role here at Vancouver Community College, for about 12 years, I had the international education portfolio, my administrative portfolios over the years. So I believe these roles combined with my role here at VCC provide me with a broad and unique perspective on the intersection of education, immigration, and labor market development in Canada. Vancouver Community College is British Columbia's oldest public post-secondary We have about 13,000 learners across various fields, including healthcare, hospitality, culinary, technology, and the trades. Of those 13,000 learners, about 30% are new to Canada immigrants, and 30% are international. And we work closely with employers to ensure that our graduates are job ready. Our students have an average age of mid-30s, and most of them already have a degree. 92% of our graduates, both international and domestic, secure employment within months of completing their studies here at VCC. And many of our graduates fill that critical labor market needs in the areas of healthcare, hospitality, automotive, and technology. So the impacts of these recent reforms over the last year that have been implemented by RCC have created significant challenges for institutions like VCC and others. The first one being that reduced student intake cap. I'll be very clear, many of us agree that we needed to have a cap put in place. So with those caps that were announced in January, we have seen declines up to 90% in applications to BC public colleges, which threaten our labor supply in industries like healthcare, technology, and hospitality. So that's one of the unintended outcomes. The second is the postgraduate work permit reforms. The new eligibility criteria fails to account for regional labor needs and disproportionately excludes college-trained professionals that are critical to Canada's economy. And let me share 3 specific examples with you to give some context. Our culinary and hospitality graduates that are vital to our tourism economies, both in the metro and rural regions, are excluded, even though non-permanent residents make up over 2/3 of the 2 million people in that sector for the workforce. So that's according to Stats Canada. College-trained dental hygienists and dental assistants are excluded from postgraduate work permit eligibility, despite the new National Dental Care Program. And early childhood education was initially excluded, and we're very thankful that that is now being reconsidered. And those are just 3 specific examples of the impact these reforms have. So these exclusions, without proper consultation, hinder our ability to address labor market shortages, and at the end, in my mind, will harm small and medium-sized businesses. Third point I'd like to make is this inequity between public colleges and universities. Treating public college credentials differently from university programs undermines the essential role colleges play in meeting labor market needs and undermines Canada's education reputation. Our graduates are equally vital to Canada's economic growth. The fourth point I'll talk about is regional implications. International students in British Columbia contribute over $8 billion annually to BC's economy and support nearly 80,000 jobs. With over 1 million projected job openings in the coming decade, these reforms, without proper consultation, risk exacerbating our labor market shortages. And the fifth one, Andre's already mentioned, Canada's reputation is at risk. These overlapping and sometimes what are perceived as hasty policy reforms have weakened Canada's global reputation as a top education destination, and we need to address that. So my recommendations to address these challenges, I urge this standing committee to recommend to the government, first, work with the provinces to update the list of postgraduate work permit eligible programs to better reflect regional labor market needs. Secondly, treat public college credentials equally to that of universities for postgraduate work permit eligibility. Third one, I call on engagement with all stakeholders to strengthen partnerships between institutions, provinces, and the federal government and IRCC. We all have a role to play in this success. And the fourth one, any policy reform should be implemented gradually so that clear timelines and thorough consultation take place to avoid unintended impacts. VCC, along with many of the organizations I represent and our public sector here in British Columbia, we're committed to supporting a sustainable international student program that benefits students, communities, and Canada's economy as a whole. I look forward to hearing from the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patel. 5 minutes, 32 seconds. So now is the time to move to the honorable members. And first round, for 6 minutes, we will start with Mr. Commish. Mr. Commish, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I have, I'm just warning the witnesses now, my questions are kind of fast. I was going to start with Mr. Patel first. You mentioned that you support the cap. Were you consulted on before the immigration changes were made?
No, we were not. There were some basic information collected, but not consultation around the specifics of the caps. I think we agreed with having caps, but since then there was no consultation with us as institutions. I don't know if there was any other consultation with, or what level of consultation took place with the provinces.
Do you support making the cap permanent?
I support making the cap permanent as long as it lines up with Canada's need. And I think that's the important piece is what does Canada need first, and then let's look at the cap.
So you're a public college. Do you support the cap on master's and PhD students?
If it's, yeah, and short answer to that is yes. But again, we need to know what does Canada need. Do we need more people in certain master's programs? Then yes, I would support that being part of the cap. Do you need more college graduates? When you look at the labor market need in British Columbia, many of our
Sorry, Mr. Patel, I'm just going to interrupt you there. How often does IRCC check on the status of students with your registrar's office?
I'd have to get back to you with that answer. My international head office would know the specific, but at least a couple of times a year.
Okay, if you could provide that to the committee, it would be really helpful. And do you know if IRCC checks with your institution before they issue the study permit, whether the students have paid their first full year of tuition with your institution?
Yes, the IRCC has implemented a mechanism where once we issue a letter of acceptance, we share that information with IRCC, and that information
Sorry,
we share.
sorry, Mr. Patel, I didn't say letter of acceptance. I know that you do that. I meant the first year of tuition, whether it's been paid up or not, before the student is issued a study permit.
Yes, we do make sure that the tuition is paid up, and we communicate that to our IRCC.
Okay, and when do you communicate that?
As soon as the student is paid and we issue the letter of acceptance.
Does that sometimes happen that the student is already in Canada before they pay in full?
No, our college policy, we must receive the tuition payment in full before we issue anything.
Okay, thank you for those answers. Mr. Jacob, do you support the cap?
I do.
Do you support making the cap permanent?
Would follow what some of the other people who intervene already. I would, if we are able to ensure that we meet the needs of the different schools and the healthcare industry. In my case,
Was your organization consulted before these immigration changes were made?
not that I know of.
Not that you know of.
I have just been appointed.
I know. Maybe if you can get back to the committee, if anybody else in your organization was
Absolutely.
consulted, that would be very helpful for us to know. Would you support keeping then the cap on the master's and PhD students? You mentioned that it's important for nursing.
As long as it meets the needs. So we would have to see the inner workings of how that would happen.
Okay, I'll take that as a conditional yes.
Yes.
I understand. Mr. Cote, I'm going to ask you, obviously, you said you supported the cap with some nuance. You provided the nuance. You used the word crisis quite a bit. When did the crisis start?
I mean, I think this has been, a slow simmering thing that's been building really for a decade. I would say, and then obviously we saw things just sort of turbocharged coming out of the pandemic, where it reached a point where something had to be done.
So, but what do you mean that something had to be done? You mean to stop the abuse in the system, or the very high numbers of international students entering the country being driven by demand? Or do you mean for something to stop it, as in that the government wasn't doing enough?
I mean, I think, sure, the talk of the bad actors and the abuse of the system, there was surely some of that, but I think it's mostly the numbers. I think the growth was just so dramatic, and I think that the sense was we needed to kind of pull the emergency brake.
So you're saying the crisis started in about 2020 to 2022 when the government started making decisions to make it easier for persons to enter Canada on an international study permit?
I mean, put it this way: when I was working in the Ontario government, we made a decision back around 2017 to wind down the public-private college partnership program, and the subsequent government kind of wound it back up. But even then, we knew there were some problems in the system. So, I mean, I think things go that far back, maybe further.
And do you know if your organization was consulted before the immigration changes were announced?
We were not consulted.
Not consulted. Do you support then making the cap permanent?
I do, yeah.
Would you support the cap being made permanent on master's and PhD students as well?
I mean, I think I need to understand better how it's applied, but I think the key point would be, I think the federal government should be very clear in providing their allocations to the provinces and largely defer to the provinces in terms of how they want to make the allocations available both to their institutions and for the fields of study or the types
Sorry, Mr.
of
Cote, I'm going to
programs.
interrupt you.
Sure.
You talked about the trust for prospective international students. What about the trust of Canadians? You've seen a very fast drop in support amongst Canadian citizens and permanent residents for immigration, and the immigration consensus has been destroyed in Canada. So how should the government keep the trust of Canadians that they're actually running an immigration levels and immigration system for their benefit instead of for the benefit of those who are, frankly, outside of Canada at the moment?
I mean, I think efforts now need to be made to rebuild that trust. Frankly, I think it's heartening that there's some resilience in public sentiments, but I think you're right that it has fallen, and so I think this is part of a broader package of reforms to get things back on track. But I think this will be a longer term thing.
Thank you very much. So we will now go to Madam Zahid for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to all the three witnesses for appearing before the committee. First, my questions will be for Mr. Cote. Mr. Cote, I would like to focus on your September article in the OUSA's Educated Solutions article. It's an interesting article. You point out that international student enrollment in Ontario has grown by 342% in less than a decade. So Ontario accounts for nearly 75% of the international college student enrollment. Do you think that this growth is sustainable?
Well, first off, I want to thank you for reading the article. I wasn't sure whether anyone had. Do I think that growth is sustainable? No, absolutely not. And I think, I think the situation looked different in different parts of the country. I think it was most concentrated in the Ontario college sector and reflected in that growth. And I think, that was a major contributor to sort of needing to pull the emergency brake here.
You outline a number of recommendations for the Government of Ontario in that article. So before I address them specifically, I would like to ask, do you have any indication the province is acting on the areas of concern you have identified in that?
I mean, well, so firstly, we've been in some dialogue with the Ontario, Ministry of Colleges and Universities, and also I think in terms of some of their public announcements, they have come out and said they're going to be tightening the screws on public-private college partnerships, which received a lot of attention. So they have signaled that they're going to sort of seek to make some changes. But I think what we get into in the article is. Oversight of DLIs, for example, is by and large a provincial responsibility, or it should be. And my co-author on this work we're going to put out likes to call it, and he was an ADM in the Ontario government that oversaw the international student program. He liked to call the DLI policy the lobster trap. Where basically once an institution was approved as a DLI, there was very little oversight beyond. So we outlined some recommendations for beefing up, for provinces to beef up oversight of DLIs. And you might have other questions, so maybe I'll pause there.
Yes, so because giving an indication is a different thing, but has the Government of Ontario started acting on any of those recommendations? Whether it is DLIs or any other, have they started acting?
Not that I'm aware of.
My next question is, you identify the need to improve the Designated Learning Institutions program, and that's, could you outline the shortcomings with this program in Ontario and how you think the province can improve it?
Sure. I mean, I think that, so I think thinking about quality assurance for designated learning institutions and how it is tracked, how it is reported. So there are a whole bunch of mechanisms there. And I think that includes recruitment practices, where we've seen some major challenges. So how to put in place firmer standards, safeguards around recruitment overseas. In terms of the actual student experience while on the ground here in Canada, so how are provincial governments overseeing VLIs to ensure that international students are having a sort of a satisfactory experience, are treated well? I think student supports is a big one. Obviously, there's been a big focus on housing, but also around employment. Those have been big issues. Academic supports. And a variety of other factors. And I think, some of the work we've done with international students, it is a major life leap to head to an entirely different country and sort of seek to pursue your education and potentially your life in this place. And I think we haven't necessarily done enough to ensure that our institutions are providing the supports and kind of the safeguards for those students while they're here.
Address the issue of the third-party recruiters, usually overseas, that makes many misleading or false promises to recruit the international students to Ontario institutions. Given issues of borders and jurisdiction, what could provincial and the federal governments do to address these issues? How can we control that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there are examples from various jurisdictions of codes of practice. I think that one aspect is anecdotally, but I think there's been enough evidence of this. We've heard that recruiters, and it won't just be third-party recruiters, have made basically express commitments to students that becoming an international student in Canada would put them on this pathway to citizenship. So really, sort of falsely presenting the kind of the immigration pathway opportunity there. So there could certainly be sort of beefed up requirements in terms of ensuring that recruiters are sort of singing off the same song sheet as they're out engaging with students. And I'm sure some of my other witnesses might have some thoughts on this as well.
Thank you. Madam Jahid, we will go to Mr. Brunel Sapp for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses who are here this evening. And this is rare, but I appreciate the questions from my colleague, Mr. Kmich. I noticed that none of you were consulted when the federal government was putting in place these measures. I think that's worth noting. Mr. Jacob, you spoke about pan-Canadian measures in your opening remarks. You agree with some of these measures, but when there's a whole-of-Canada approach, isn't that a little bit risky? Because it can paper over the differences between certain regions or certain provinces. Can you speak on that, please? Yes. So I wasn't really talking about whole-of-Canada measures. I wanted to talk about the whole-of-Canada impacts of these measures on nursing programs across Canada. It is clear that when we look into the data, there's a lot of variability between one region and another, and one academic institution and another. So I think for that reason, the government should look at the needs of different provinces. Take Quebec for one example. Quebec is a francophone province, which comes with certain needs. There's the needs of the Anglophone population to take into account as well. So there's a conversation that has to be had about that. Back in January, the minister put in place measures related to the open work permit for spouses of students. Then the program was changed so that it would only apply to people in law schools, medicine schools, graduate schools, and postgraduate schools. Of course, that was changed later on. And it was all to make it. This was to take into account that nurses from abroad often come with a spouse and children. This was a whole of Canada, so that was a whole of Canada measure focused on certain Ontario colleges, but it had a negative impact on certain provinces. Would it not? Yes, that's true. I would like to talk about another subject brought up by certain ambassadors from African countries. I spoke to ambassadors from Morocco, Cote d'Ivoire, and other countries. They said, be careful when you go to recruit a bunch of African nurses because it will create a bit of a brain drain. These countries are finding that there is a shortage of nurses in their territories. Is there an ethical question to be raised here? Certainly. You've touched on a few points there. First, there's the people that we recruit into entry programs, so they're not nurses already in their country, but they still that still draws people from the recruitment pools abroad. This gets into the topic of ethical student recruitment and consideration for other countries. We don't necessarily want to eviscerate the resources of other countries, so there needs to be a balance between international ethics and domestic considerations. Thank you, Mr. Patel. I admired your opening remarks. In November 1st, 2024, people from public colleges were said not to be eligible for postgraduate work permits unless their field of study was linked to a long-term labor need. We heard that there's a lot of public college programs that could be wiped out by this change. The federal government was supposed to better align the labor market needs and the immigration system. Do you agree with the postgraduate work permit reforms?
I do not agree with the postgraduate work reforms as they currently stand, because they don't necessarily line up with the labor market needs of the particular regions and have unintended impacts on local rural economies. So, for example, the tourism sector, we have a number of major games happening here in Vancouver. We need to make sure we have enough people to serve that need, and we know that that need is not going to be filled by our domestic students alone, that we need to have immigrants or international students fill that labor market need. So that's one just specific example. So I would love to have that reconsideration.
J'ai envie de vous poser la même question à M. Patel.
I would now like to ask Mr. Patel the same question as I asked Mr. Jacob regarding the whole of Canada approach. In your opening remarks, you spoke about how important it was for the federal government to consult provinces and various stakeholders. A whole of Canada approach. Well, do you believe that a whole of Canada approach should be modified to take into account the needs of different regions?
I believe that we need to take, I do believe that we need to take into account the specific regional needs. In British Columbia specifically, I can speak to the fact that the provincial government has been proactive with the public institutions here around tuition transparency, student support, a 30% cap on international students, a code of practice for third-party recruiters. So that's just some examples that the provincial government has put into policy on public post-secondary. And so I do think there needs to be more consultation directly with the stakeholders involved.
Thank you very
Merci.
much. Thank you. And now we will go to MP Kwan for 6 minutes. Please go ahead, MP Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for their presentations. I want to just sort of get a little bit into the notion that the government did no consultation with any of you. But to that point, with respect to the cap, when we're talking about what the implications are for Canada on the whole, but also for different regions, and then, of course, into the specific sectors in terms of the labor needs. And so my first question would be to Mr. Jacob, to the point to the healthcare sector. Do you have any information or data on what your projection is in terms of Canada's need in the healthcare sector to meet the labor demands?
In terms of nursing workforce?
Yeah.
I would be able to get you those numbers. What I shared with you we're mostly for the education sector. I represent mostly the educational institutions. But of course, it is to meet the growing shortage. We do know that the shortage has been there for quite some time, and we've been trying to catch up. But I can definitely get you some specific numbers if you'd like to.
Yes, if you could do that, that would be, I think, very useful, because one of the questions that I have for the minister, of course, is have they actually done a full economic analysis and the implications for Canada on the whole, and of course, the analysis on the labor demands. So if you have any information related to that, that would be very useful. Can I ask the same question to Mr. Patel?
Hi, thank you. No, in BC, we have a labor market outlook that's put out by our own provincial government of a decade outlook that shows you what jobs can be filled by Canadian or permanent residents or migration within Canada, and then what jobs are going to have to be filled by those outside of Canada. And that is issued annually, and I can certainly forward that to the committee based on what I can determine as the analysis of the postgrad work permit eligibility. That was not considered in this context.
Thank you. That would be very useful, just so that we have that on record as well. Now, to the question around CAP, and I believe Mr. Patel and Mr. Jacob, you both answered to say as long as it meets needs. Can you actually be more specific about what you mean by needs, and can you define needs? Do you mean labor market needs? What does that mean exactly? Because some people might interpret it to mean something else. So let's start with Mr. Jacob, and then we'll come to Mr. Patel.
To one of your colleagues, there are the needs of the industry in terms of healthcare, but there's also the educational needs or education sector needs. So we need to look at projection of needed PhDs and masters for education, but masters for clinical as well. So there's different avenues. So I think there needs to be a very detailed analysis of what that would look like. So when I'm thinking of a cap, I think I'm responding to the need to have things on, for ethical recruitment, some very clear parameters to bring students in from international. But also it's to meet the needs of our healthcare sector and our academic institutions.
Thank you. Mr. Patel, on the same question?
I would define needs as working with ourselves and the BC government in identifying what our labor market needs are in specific regions, so that the government, the provincial government that is, has some autonomy to ask public post-secondary to ensure that we are training the workforce that will meet those labor market needs, and taking into consideration how that need will be filled between domestic students and non-domestic residents.
Mr. Patel, can you elaborate on the implications of this public policy now for VCC specifically? I'm aware that actually in the news, VCC Faculty Association has already mentioned that there will be layoffs. So what are the implications both from a staff point of view as well as access to programs for both domestic and international students?
At this point, we have not announced any layoffs. We are just monitoring our enrollment in hopes that we can minimize any employment impact. We do anticipate the declining numbers would have impact on not just providing programs that fit the labor market needs, as I addressed earlier, but potentially some of those revenues that we have to better support our other diverse student body, particularly the programs for blind, deaf, hard hearing, visually impaired, and a number of the programs that we have for our new immigrants. So many institutions use the net revenue from international students to help support some of those program areas, but the biggest hit could be in the area of the labor market.
Around implications. I know that you were not consulted. Were you made aware of what the government's goal is with respect to their announcement at any point in time? So first to Mr. Jake, but then Mr. Patel.
I'm not aware of any of that information being shared.
Mr. Patel?
I'm not aware of any information being shared other than there was supposed to be a cap on international student numbers, but no consultation.
There's the issue about differences in regions, provinces, and so on. Now, there are some issues with respect to international students, especially with the bad actors, meaning that people who are fraudulently engaged in bringing international students to Canada. with both consultants as well as potentially involvement with the institutions, and particularly those from the private sector. So my quick question to Mr. Patel is there a difference between provinces, and is the government's approach to addressing this using this sort of broad scope approach ineffective?
I can only speak on behalf of the province of BC, and we do have amongst the public post-secondary codes of practice and standards that we follow if we use third party. I know that is not consistent across the country.
About 6 minutes left, so I think we'll go 2-2 and 1-1. So 2 minutes, 2-2, 1-1. Okay, so you know what I mean. 2 minutes to Conservative, 2 to Liberals, 1 NDP and Bloc. Okay, so before I waste any more time, I will go to Mr. Redikoff for 2 minutes, please.
Larry.
Oh, Larry, my friend. Mr. Mugar, go ahead for 2 minutes.
Mr. Cote, you, I'm just going to first of all go, you weren't consulted, Mr. Jacobs. There's an urgent demand here across Canada for skilled workers in the crucial sectors, including health. So can you explain how has this uncertainty caused by the abrupt changes announced by the Liberals, government created an impact in Canada's reputation as a destination for top talent? You mentioned the master's and the PhD students, but can you just elaborate on that?
For the reputation itself?
Yeah.
I can only speak to the effects. So what we're seeing is decreased enrollment, right?
So you're doing that out of decreased enrollment.
Right.
What other impacts would you see in regards to that as well? Is there, what are your number of students going to look like?
Well, what we've seen is, there are multiple, right? Multiple impacts. So when you're looking at the functioning of any academic institution, they're not in silos. So if you're going to affect the budget of the universities or colleges, you will see that all sectors will be affected, including nursing. So, there's if you're looking at the college sector with the PSW programs that have been affected by these international caps, they end up affecting the number of faculty that are available within the different departments. And, we're looking at not being able to deliver as many nurses as we would like to in terms of responding to the needs.
Maybe I'll ask Mr. Patel, what do you see as the reputation here? How do you describe the Liberals' motivation in addressing this? And could they have better policy choices in the past to avoid the outcome that we've seen today?
I think if we had gone through a more comprehensive consultation process and been able to work collectively with the province and institutions, we might, I think Andre referenced this, that would get us to a better place. Just on the ground, when you speak to our folks that are overseas, like our staff that fly overseas, the Canada brand has taken a significant hit, and it's going to take some time to rebuild that reputation back up as a study destination and a high-quality education destination.
We'll go to now Mr. Ali. Mr. Ali, 2 minutes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. My question is to Mr. Cote. With international students accounting for a significant share of tuition revenue in Ontario's post-secondary institutions, do you think the federal government's reform will help to reduce the risk associated with over-reliance on this revenue stream?
Well, I think it will force a reduction in the over-reliance on that revenue stream. I think we're already starting to see some of the cracks in the system as a result of the fall off in international student numbers. So with certain colleges announcing campus closures, and I think we're just at the beginning of what's going to happen. But I also think this was just not sustainable. And also we're not providing solid outcomes for many of these learners. And we were giving them a bit of a false bill of goods in terms of their opportunity to stay here in Canada. So something had to be done.
Thank you. Your report mentions the need for a strategic approach to integrating international students into the economy and society. Do you see the federal government's reform as laying the groundwork for more balanced education sector?
Well, I mean, I think, and international education strategies going back a decade or so have focused on this idea of alignment to labor market, to filling labor market needs. And so obviously that's a priority in terms of these federal reforms. I think it's just, and really I agreed with what Mr. Patel was saying, it's really about the way or the mechanism for going about it, especially around this connection to postgraduate work permit eligibility for college programs. I feel like that is something that would be much better decided at a provincial level, where there's just a keener sense of local labor market needs and demands, and that capability for, sort of setting it at that level, as opposed to nationally, where it's really a blunt instrument.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Ali. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
2 minutes, 10 seconds. So thank you. So we will go to Mr. Brunner for 1 minute, please.
Bon, une seule minute, mais...
Just 1 minute, okay. Mr. Cote, you caught my attention when you spoke about a failure of federalism. That really spoke to me. I think you are saying what everyone else is saying. I'd like to hear you talk about how the federal government not only does not consult stakeholders, but also about whether it should perhaps let provinces make more decisions.
Merci pour
Thank you for that question.
in English, just because I'll be able to go quicker. I mean, I think, and I think we've been seeing this in many areas, but you see the way that like this is a jointly managed system, the International Student Program, and yet you have this situation where the federal government felt compelled to take these sort of unilateral steps without adequate consultation with stakeholders, but also, from what I can gather, with provinces. And I just do not feel like we will be capable of properly sort of reforming and fixing the system if we do not have better coordination between the federal and provincial territorial governments, a clear sort of division of labor, whether it's overseeing DLIs, whether it's putting in place the standards or requirements around international recruitment, when we're using kind of a common brand Canada, obviously differentiated for certain provinces or certain institutions. But I just have a very hard time seeing how we're going to repair the system without a much more coordinated approach.
Thank you very much. We will go to MP Kwan. MP Kwan, 1 minute, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Jacob. Any recommendations that you would want to make to the government?
Make sure that you look at what happens to the schools of nursing. If you're going to increase the numbers or ask to increase the numbers in the schools, the resources need to follow. And if you end up cutting within the academic institutions for those types of programs, you're not going to get the output that you're looking for.
I think we've heard from all the witnesses about the lack of consultation and the importance of coordination and working together. Would you recommend that the government pause this plan and begin that work now so that we can get it right? Just a quick answer from all the witnesses.
I say yes.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Patel. Mr. Cote?
I mean, I don't think it can be paused, but I think there's no reason the government couldn't step in now and say, we're going to be thinking long term, and we're going to be convening, consulting around a new long-term strategy together.
Mr. Jacob?
I would agree with more consultation, absolutely.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the committee members, I would love to thank Mr. Patel, Mr. Cote, and Mr. Jacob for your time and input to the committee. Thank you. With that, we will suspend for 5 minutes for the next round of witnesses. Here we go.
Thank you.
I'll call the meeting back to order. I would like to welcome our witnesses for the second panel, and we would start with Higher Education Strategy Associates, Ms. McLennan, a Senior Research Associate. Ms. McLennan, welcome to the committee. And from the Simon Fraser University, we have with us Mr. Razier or Razier. Mr. Delson Razier, welcome to the committee. From the Canadian Bar Association, we have Madam Kamaljeet Lehil, welcome to the committee. And with us, we also have V. William Tao. Mr. Tao, welcome to the committee as well. Up to 5 minutes will be given to the opening remarks, and then we will proceed with the rounds of questions. And we'll start with Ms. McLennan for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for having me as a witness today. My name is Tiffany McLennan, and I'm a Senior Research Associate at Higher Education Strategy Associates, a consultancy in Toronto. I've studied at St. FX University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, and now hold a Master's in Education Policy Analysis from Harvard University. In both my academic and professional careers, I spend the majority of my time analyzing sectoral trends and understanding what drives decision-makings within the Canadian post-secondary education system. The roots of the challenges facing the international student program today run deep, stemming from years of systemic underinvestment and various policy decisions. For over a decade, provincial government spending on the post-secondary education sector has been stagnant across the country. On top of this stagnation, many provinces have introduced domestic student tuition caps. Combined, these two things have resulted in less real university and college operating funding per student over time. Instead of investing government money, provincial governments encourage colleges and universities to become more entrepreneurial and produce new revenue sources to meet their costs. As a result, many institutions turn to recruiting significant numbers of international students. The over-reliance on international student recruitment not only became a financial lifeline for many institutions, but also introduced significant pressures on the local infrastructure, particularly the housing market. The interplay between institutional strategies and inadequate provincial support for housing exacerbated an already critical supply and demand imbalance. Nowhere was this more apparent than in regions like Southern Ontario, where some colleges leverage international student recruitment as a monetized pathway to permanent residency, intensifying an already noticeable strain. While it is undeniable that action was necessary, the blanket caps have imposed unfair penalization across the entire sector rather than addressing the practices of a select few bad actors. The international student caps, however, represent just one facet of the damage that has been inflicted through the recent reforms to the international student program. Broader restrictions on the postgraduate work permit eligibility, limiting attraction to selected high-demand programs, have created additional barriers for both students and institutions. Compounding these challenges is the narrative from the minister who has openly questioned the quality of Canada's post-secondary sector, labeling certain institutions as diploma mills, a term that undermines the credibility of the entire system. These reputational blows, coupled with the financial strain of the caps, have had a chilling effect on international student recruitment. Many institutions across the country are already reporting steep declines in applications, far exceeding what might be expected solely from the introduction of enrollment limits. It is crucial to recognize that no single entity is responsible for the series of actions that have brought us to this point. Provincial governments neglected to appropriately fund institutions, colleges and universities leverage international students as a source of funding, with some overusing the resource, and the federal government took an action that was understood to be a problem. However, there were many other options that would have been available and less damaging to the sector. To give an example, even setting a limit at a max of 25% of the student population being international, with allowing for exceptions with things like graduate student programming at U of T bringing in top talent, would have been an alternative that would have punished bad actors without causing harm across the entire sector. The lack of regional and targeted measures will not only reduce the opportunity for international students to learn in the country, but also decrease opportunities for domestic students. Already we are seeing institutions cut off entire program offerings, close regional campuses, and lay off hundreds of staff members. A question that should have been considered much more deeply is, should students studying in Atlantic Canada, rural Manitoba, or interior BC have less access to education as a result of a problem that was largely concentrated in a handful of Southern Ontario colleges? Addressing systemic challenges in higher education requires thoughtful, regionally tailored solutions that balances accountability with the preservation of access and opportunity. Broad, untargeted policies risk undermining the very foundation of an inclusive and robust educational system, leaving both international and domestic students to bear the brunt of poorly considered decisions. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 4 minutes. Excellent timing. So now we'll go to Simon Fraser University Provost and Vice President Mr. Dilson Rassier. Please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and the committee for the opportunity to address you all today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam nations. Je suis heureux d'avoir l'occasion de parler à propos des récents changes de gouvernement.
I am pleased to speak to the committee about the Government of Canada's recent changes to the International Student Program, a subject that we know all too well at Simon Fraser University.
You will know, Simon Fraser University is a leading research university advancing an inclusive and sustainable future. Based in British Columbia, SFU has over 37,000 students across 3 campuses in Burnaby, Surrey, and Vancouver. Since 1995, we have a demonstrated record of helping business and academia commercialize their great ideas right here at home. Our dedication to driving innovation has enabled us to attract the world's best and brightest to Canada. Students from abroad who choose to study at SFU bring incredible ideas and diversity of thought to our classrooms. And those who graduate and stay in Canada have gone on to contribute greatly to our domestic economy. International and domestic students alike are studying in computer science, engineering, health sciences, as well as business and social science programs at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. Immigration reform has become a priority for the Government of Canada, escalating urgency over the past 18 months. These matters are incredibly complex. While we agree on the need to address bad actors and to increase housing supply for students and Canadians alike, we feel it's crucial to approach this challenge with care and consideration, especially given where we find ourselves today. Canada's talent gap is widening, and our domestic productivity continues to lag behind global competitors, a decades-long issue exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. SFU and other research universities are uniquely positioned to help address these challenges. Through partnerships with industry, we drive innovation, create economic opportunities, and prepare students for the jobs of the future. Actions taken to address this complex set of issues have caused several unintended and significant consequences, including the financial burden placed on institutions who are largely unaware of and not consulted on these changes. At SFU, we have been recognized as Canada's top comprehensive university, offering a diverse academic program. These changes implemented by IRCC have resulted in significant declines across all faculties at the undergraduate and graduate levels, impacting our globally recognized research programs. In these challenging times, when the need for collaboration and collective action is greater than ever before, SFU and our colleagues in the sector are ready and willing to help government, and they are already doing so in a diversity of ways. Take housing, for example. Through SFU's Housing Master Plan, we are investing in delivering affordable housing and childcare for students that is reducing pressure in the community. Over the last year, we opened 865 new accommodations for students on the Burnaby campus, meaning more students have on-campus housing and are not competing in the local rental market, freeing up lower-cost rentals. This brings the number of on-campus students' beds to more than 2,450. The next phase of students' housing will open in fall 2027, creating additional accommodations for 445 students and 160-space childcare center. We encourage all committee members to recognize the unintended, immediate, and long-term consequences these blunt policies measures will have on Canada's economy. These measures will, without a doubt, affect SFU's ability to help close Canada's talent gap through workforce training, to drive innovative research, and to foster economic growth. And this will impact the whole post-secondary sector. Enfin, nous vous encourageons à dialoguer avec les universités.
Leslie, we would encourage you to sit down with universities and higher education institutions to talk with them. We are there to help you mitigate potential risks, avoid unintended consequences, and build a sustainable pathway for international education and for the Canadian economy. By working together, we can ensure that institutions like SFU can continue to educate the next generation of Canadian leaders and innovators, all while helping to grow Canada's economy.
Once again for the opportunity to address you today and look forward to your questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. 4 minutes, 32 seconds. Again, excellent timing. So now we will go to the Canadian Bar Association. Madam Lehel or Mr. Tao, you have 5 minutes. So with that...
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kamaljit Lehel. I'm Chair of the CBA National Immigration Law Section, and this is my colleague Will Tao, also a member of the section. Thank you for the opportunity to come here before you on this important topic. The recent reforms to this program are intended to primarily target fraud within the system. And while these measures may help to somewhat safeguard the program's integrity, they directly and adversely impact students who came to Canada in good faith, committed years to studying and working here, and who were led to believe through government messaging that by doing so there was a pathway to permanent residence. The reforms now expect students to leave the country and yet do not hold bad actors accountable. This committee has been tasked with studying the impact of these reforms, and we need to look at both the immediate and long-term consequences. In terms of immediate impact, again, it's on the students already in Canada who paid premium tuition fees to pursue studies here under an immigration system that supported their families to be here while they studied, permitted spouses to work, provided a postgraduate work permit as a next step towards the ultimate goal of PR. Quite abruptly, the legal framework has changed, and tens of thousands of students in Canada are now grappling with uncertainty and the threat of removal from the country they've come to call home. Many of those students, and I really want to emphasize this, many of those students are members of racialized and equity-deserving communities who are more likely to face barriers in addressing these challenges that they now face to their immigration status. And from a humanitarian perspective, we must also acknowledge the profound mental health toll these changes are taking on international students. In terms of long-term consequences, it's undisputed that international students contributed to Canada's GDP, supported jobs in Canada, paid taxes. We need to assess the long-term impact of the exodus of thousands of students from Canada under these reforms. Another long-term consequence is to the reputational harm to Canada's immigration system resulting from misaligned messaging, which may cause future students to think twice about Canada being the destination for studies. And additionally, the reforms requiring students to reapply for a study permit in order to change institutions may further erode Canada's appeal because it is creating a two-tier system. Thank you.
So the CBA National Immigration Law section makes the 5 following recommendations. If I don't get through all of them, I rely on our written materials. First, the government should prioritize creating pathways to permanent residency for students already in Canada. There are students who are here, who've studied and worked here. They're well established, some even having arrived here in their youth. They are permanent residents, but for having received the legal status. Canadians have likewise invested in them and supported them. As such, we need to implement unique pathway programs, including dedicated express entry draws, targeted at filling labor shortages and aimed at ensuring positive long-term outcomes, not only for our economy, but also for the future immigrants and their families. And a broad range of stakeholders must be consulted when building these programs. We understand that there is an in-Canada focus set out in the Levels Plan and the Minister's mandate, but how is that going to be operationalized and how is it going to be done within the current Levels Plan? Second, we should halt the systemic removal of international students with no pathway to PR until the available pathways and exemptions are made clear. As a result of these recent changes, many students will find themselves without pathways to permanent residency, having lost status or fall into non-compliance due to circumstances outside of their control. We must explore new ways to facilitate temporary and permanent measures for these individuals, utilizing the minister's authority to consider implementing new public policies and revise existing ones. Coordinated efforts to systematically remove and refuse students must be halted until we find urgent efforts to create and clarify the availability of these pathways. Third, federal and provincial governments must collaborate on a long-term plan for managing international student enrollment. This includes redefining the criteria of designated learning institutions and implementing measures to disincentivize exploitation, reduce opportunities for abuse, and provide effective oversights of agents, recruiters, and employers. We do recognize the recent positive efforts in the latest regulatory amendments. Fourth, we should introduce legislation to deter bad actors who prey on international students. This includes harsher penalties for fraud and large-scale misrepresentations. We understand that this takes more than just the whole of government approach. It likely will take a whole of society approach. And fifth and finally, a two-tier system should not be adopted. International students should have the same flexibility as local students to change studies without needing to apply for a new study permit or become non-compliant while waiting. There are many bona fide reasons for students to change institutions: mental health reasons, to prevent harm, sexual assault, for educational advancement. There needs to be at least a list of carve-outs. So in our role as immigration lawyers, we work to uphold the integrity of the system while also recognizing and empathizing with the increasing traumas of our clients. Let us ensure that Canada's policies reflect that shared value, protect international students, and hold bad actors rightfully accountable. Thank you.
4 minutes, 50 seconds. Excellent timing on this. So now we will continue to follow that with the honourable members. We will start with Mr. Kmich for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So just to the witnesses, I'm going to be going quickly through some questions. So if you keep your answers short, then I'll have to not interrupt you as often. Just like in the last round, we'll start with the provost of SFU. Sir, were you consulted on the immigration levels, on the immigration changes announced by the government for the international student program?
No.
Do you agree with the temporary cap?
No.
Would you agree to making the cap permanent?
No.
Do you agree with the cap on master's students and PhD students?
No.
In the case of your institution, how often does IRCC check with you on the status of international students?
I would have to get back to you on that question, but not very often.
If you could check with the registrar's office in your institution and get back to the committee, that would be much appreciated.
Yes.
And then I would like to know as well, does IRCC check with your institution that students have paid 1 full year of tuition before issuing them their study permit?
No.
They don't check?
Not that I'm aware. Not that. No, I have to get back to you, but not that I'm aware.
Okay, if you could provide it to committee, that would be very valuable information for us to have. I wanted to move on next now to the Higher Education Strategy Associates. I wanted to ask the same questions. Were you consulted on the changes announced by the government?
No, we were not.
Do you support the cap?
I do.
If the cap became permanent, would you support that as well?
It would depend on the conditions of the cap.
Okay, so I'll take that as a yes, but with conditions. Do you...
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président. Je pense que...
Sorry, there is a difficulty.
D'entendre la
Our interpreters don't seem to be able to hear the witness,
J'ai compris.
as I understand it.
Oh, OK. Parfait, c'est beau, c'est réglé. Merci.
Elle était d'accord avec le plafond, puis j'allais lui demander sur le plafond en permanence. Are we okay to continue, Chair?
Yes.
I
All
still have
good?
the rest of that time.
I only have 42
thank you
seconds
kindly.
gone yet. Only
Perfect.
not much. So you have 4 minutes still.
So I was
Okay.
going to continue asking you, would you support the cap was permanent? You said if it became permanent with conditions, depending how they would do it. Would you support the cap on master's and PhD students?
No.
Okay, before I go on to the Bar Association, I did want to ask you, because I'm on your website, I do read Alex Usher quite often, and I'm sure you know I was going to ask you about this. Can you comment on this particular statement that he made? Now, of course, Justin Trudeau is at the ready to back up his minister with some truly odious crocodile tears. Immigration is great, he said. We just want to punish bad actors. This is ludicrous. The government is in no way, shape, or form going after specific bad actors. It is going after the entire sector. Whether this is cruelty or stupidity, I leave to readers to decide, but Trudeau's explanation holds no water. The only possible justification for the approach the feds have taken here is that it's a national problem. This is in quotations. It isn't, but that's another story. But we have to let provinces find their own solution to the problem of bad actors. This is at least is a constitutionally correct attitude, but it's a very different one from the Prime Minister's claim. Could you please explain who are the bad actors in your view?
I can't speak on behalf of what Mr. Usher has written. He writes his blog without our input. But I would argue that the bad actors are the people who have been able to kind of exploit international students well beyond what their capacity in their communities are. Even, for example, if you look at institutions who have brought in hundreds, even thousands of international students well beyond what their funding needs are, I would consider them to be the bad actors in this situation.
I'll move on to the Bar Association now. You've heard me ask the others. I'm going to ask you the same thing. Were you consulted before these changes were announced?
I can only speak from my own personal experience. No, we can't. I can't express on behalf of the Canadian Bar Association the answer to that question. But I wasn't in my capacity.
And Madame Lal, you're the chair of the National Immigration Section, so I'm going to ask you, were you consulted?
No direct consultation, although we have regular meetings with IRCC on various topics.
Do you support the temporary cap? Does your organization support the temporary cap?
We've yet to take a position on it. I think we're going to be taking some positions on it in the days to come and months to come.
Okay. Should the cap become permanent, would you take a position on that too? Would you support that?
Again, we are looking into this, and we will be doing submissions on this. We don't have a standing position on this.
So you wouldn't have a position either on master's and PhD students at all, whether they should be included in the cap or not?
Organizationally is different than individually. I think I'm allowed in my individual capacity to say I don't agree with a cap on master's and PhD students, but organizationally we haven't taken a position.
Okay. I'm going to ask the both of you, because you are lawyers, so you have specialty in immigration law that I do not have. In Annex 4 of the Immigration Levels Plan, because you had mentioned that some of these changes somewhat target also international students very directly on their path to permanent residency. So when I'm bringing the Immigration Levels Plan, because I think it's important, you specifically disagreed with the need to make international students reapply for a new study permit if they change their designated learning institute. You had other things you were concerned with. I wanted to ask you, then, in the plan, it calls for the voluntary removal from Canada, for people to voluntarily leave almost 1 million people over 2 years. How would the ministry do this legally? Like, what are their options to ensure that people leave voluntarily? When I asked this question from the minister, he couldn't answer me. So I'm wondering what 2 expert lawyers, specifically in immigration law, understand to be the methods to make people leave.
30 seconds to answer.
What we're seeing in practice are refusals of extensions or refusals of applications and delays on processing PR, really making applicants leave on their own. Do I think it's enough, personally, to remove that many individuals in this period of time? It's going to be a hard process. So I don't think it's anything in law that'll make it that easy unless some sort of policy or program came in place or some announcement to make it a coordinated effort. But we're saying hold off on the coordinated effort until there's clear who's in and who's out of the new plans.
Thank you very much. And we will go to Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Chang. 6 minutes yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to ask questions. And I'd like to thank all the witnesses here today for committing your time to help us with the study. My first question is to the Canadian Bar Association. The government's decision to raise the financial threshold for study permit applicants aim to ensure students are better prepared for life in Canada. How does this align with recommendations from your December 2023 letter to Minister Miller to safeguard international students against financial vulnerabilities?
So obviously there needs to be financial thresholds for students, but they have to be in keeping with abilities. And I believe our submissions have always been consistently that students need to be supported with resources once they come into Canada, with housing. They are paying premium tuition fees, and so housing and counseling and all those additional supports are what are essential.
You agree that financially they need to be secure before they get to Canada?
I think all students need to be financially secure, but the bigger part is Canada's role in supporting them once they are here,
right,
in terms of resources, counseling, as I've said, and housing.
Thank you. And you have highlighted concerns about the role of unscrupulous school recruiters and immigration consultants. How might the government's measure to limit visas for programs not eligible for post-graduation work permits, as well as its enhanced verification processes to deter fraudulent actors in the system?
Go ahead.
I mean, I think those are positive steps, but the reality is, even if the rules change, those who want to exploit the system and take advantage of it will adjust their efforts as well. And unfortunately, we're dealing with a lot of students from countries where Canada's relationships might not be the strongest right now. And our ability, for example, the Philippines was a great example where we were able to do some bilateral improvement to encourage Philippine authorities to take a bigger role in combating fraud in the Philippines. With India and China and other countries right now, it might be a much more difficult situation. So I don't think it's as easy as measures will change things. I think it takes a coordinated effort on many stages to achieve that.
Thank you for those answers. And are you referring that India and China will be a difficult country to work with?
I think it'll be extremely difficult to curb some of the practices. I think they're so long-standing in those countries, and I think that it will require an enhanced level of diplomatic effort to get to there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm turning over to the higher education person. How do you view the introduction of annual cap on study permits as a measure to stabilize international students' number? And do you see this as an effective way to address capacity challenges while maintaining institutional integrity?
Yes and no is the complicated answer to that. Yes, I do think it is a step to be able to help curb some of
I'm
the
sorry,
problems
Mr.
that
Chair. I cannot hear you. Could you speak up or?
Can you speak closer to the mic, please?
Hello, check one, check two.
Turn your mic off, then it is
Okay. Okay, go ahead, please.
Apologies. As I was saying, I think the answer to that is twofold. Yes, I do think it is a measure that will be effective. With that said, effective for whom and for what is a different story. I think as we've implemented kind of a broad stroke, one-size-fits-all measure, that doesn't particularly solve issues that are happening in other places. In fact, it might create them. So while it might be an effective measure to kind of curb some of the absorptive capacity of some of the areas that these schools are in, on the flip side of that, I think it will also lead to other problems that bringing in international students have been addressing over the past decade.
Thank you so much. My next question, the decision to enhance the use of designated learning institutes portal for issuing acceptance letter was partly influenced by concerns about fraudulent consultant practices. Do you believe this move will address such issues, and are there additional safeguards institutions and government should consider?
I'm not perfectly equipped to speak to that. We are a consultancy who works with institutions and are not in any form of recruiting. I do think the designated learning institutions are a first step in moving towards there, but I think there will be more steps that will have to be taken.
Would you recommend any of the additional steps that we could take to make this system more credible?
I could get back to you with recommendations, yes.
Great. Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You have still a minute.
I will go ahead.
Okay?
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. So how do you, thank you so much. How do you anticipate the changes limiting spousal work permit for undergraduate and college level international students will impact Canada's competitiveness in the global education market? That's for you, yes.
All right, thank you. I believe the places that will affect the most are the colleges and the college vocational schools that are offering their programming. Their students are traditionally older, participating in things that are directly related to our labor market as opposed to some more traditional undergraduate programming. So I think as a result of that, we'll see less demand in some of the programming that is high need, high demand, especially in vocational type programming.
Much, Mr. Chang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We will go to Mr. Bruno Decep for 6 minutes. Please go ahead, Mr. Bruno Decep.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us tonight. Ms. McClellan, in your opening remarks, you said that a number of universities have been using international students to bring in more money because they've been underfunded by certain provinces. Is this true for all universities in Canada?
Madam McLennan, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's true of the system overall. I can't speak to the motivations between every single institution in the country. There's quite a few. But between each province, the funding for the post-secondary sector overall has been stagnant, with very minimal new money coming in on behalf of the governments. And while their costs continue to rise as an incredibly labor-intensive institution, that money has to be made up somewhere. So in places like Nova Scotia, where you have a 3% domestic student tuition cap, their hands have been quite tied, in lack of a better term. So, yeah.
Est-ce que vous connaissez le réseau des universités du...
Do you know about the Network of Quebec Universities, that organization?
Pardon, could you repeat that, translator?
Est-ce que vous connaissez...
Are you familiar with the Réseau des Universités du Québec, the organization?
I am familiar, but there are people in our office who are from Quebec and work in Quebec and have studied in Quebec, so I would not be the right person to
Parfait.
answer any particular.
Merci beaucoup parce que je veux juste dire au comité là.
Thank you, because I would just like to note for the committee, Quebec, the Réseau des Universités du Québec has more students than the University of Toronto. And we heard from the Réseau, they get $21 million for international students, but only $18 million for students from Quebec. So international students need to be taken into account. I imagine things are different elsewhere, but there's a major difference between what the Quebec Universities Network receives and what other schools receive. And this is why it's so important to talk about targeted measures instead of a whole-of-Canada approach, because there's a number of differences from one university to another, especially in Quebec, where our universities are in a network. Do you agree that we should move away from a whole-of-Canada approach?
Yes, I agree. I think targeted measures are the way to move forward.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Mme McLennan.
Thank you, Ms. McLennan. For our friends from the Canadian Bar Association, what do you think about Mr. Miller's belief that immigration consultants are improperly advising students to request asylum? And what do you think about the infamous problems with immigration consultants that we hear so much about?
Thank you for that question. There is indeed, we've been using the term bad actors in the system, and international students have been misguided and misled on a number of fronts. With respect to refugee claims on that point alone, you have students here from countries where those countries are known to be refugee-producing countries. Can you hear me?
Let Madam Lehel finish and then
Allez-y, allez-y. Non, je voulais juste savoir combien de temps il me restait.
No, go ahead, go ahead. I was just trying to check how much time I had left. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, so
Okay.
with respect to students being guided to make refugee claims by consultants, that may indeed be something that's happening, but we also need to realize that students from a number of countries are coming from refugee-producing countries. There's human rights violations in a number of countries, such as Colombia, Nigeria, Ghana, China, India, all these countries. So there's a number of reasons why students may not, when they first come in, make a refugee claim. And they may have very legitimate reasons then to make a claim. You come in on a student permit, you don't have to deal with an uncertainty of making a refugee claim, which are complex, but there are circumstances now that may compel them to do that because the country conditions are such that...
Et que la situation au pays peut changer entre le moment où ils...
And things in their home country can change once they're already in Canada. After a year in Canada, maybe the situation back at home can change completely, and then that might drive them to claim asylum.
That's correct. Circumstances can change. Thank you. Sorry, just a bit of a delay.
Oui, je sais, c'est welcome to my...
No, I get it. Welcome to my world.
Monsieur le Président, je profite et je...
Chair? Sorry for the witnesses, but I'd like to take advantage of the time remaining to me to resume discussion of the motion from earlier in December. I'd like to get my motion passed, and I'd like to reread it. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the implications for Canada of the measures announced by Donald Trump during the U.S. presidential campaign regarding the deportation of persons who are in the United States illegally, as well as on the Canadian federal government's plan to ensure border security and compliance with federal immigration statutes and policies. That the committee invite the following witnesses to appear, one for 2 hours each, accompanied by senior officials from their respective departments: A, Mark Miller, Minister of Immigration and Citizenship, and B, Dominic LeBlanc, Minister of Public Safety. 2, for 1 hour each, Ms. Kirsten Hillman, Canadian Ambassador to the United States, and B. David L. Cohen, U.S. Ambassador to Canada. 3, as well as any other witnesses that the committee considers necessary in accordance with the usual practices of the committee, and that the committee prioritize the study and report its findings to the House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brunel Duceppe. I have 3 speakers on my list. I would like to have the direction from the committee member because MP Kwan did not have her 6 minutes. Unfortunately, you are in order, but I just wanted direction from the committee. Do we release the witnesses or we hold them? Hold them? Keep them? Okay, thank you. So, to dear witnesses, there's a motion that is in order on the floor, so I have to deal with that. We have to deal with that, and please, relax a bit, and I will ask you to come back. I'm sorry for the interruption, but your input is very much appreciated. So. Please be with us. So with that, it's the debate. I have MP Kwan, then Mr. Chang, and Mr. Comich. MP Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As you've noted, we've got about 15 minutes before the end of the committee. I have yet to ask my 6-minute questions. This happens to me quite a lot. Welcome to my world, where committee members would make a motion and then would cut off the opportunity for the NDP to ask any questions. In the spirit of that, Mr. Chair, I move adjournment of debate on the motion.
Adjournment of the debate, non-debatable motion. All in favor of the motion, please raise their hands to adjourn the debate. No. All against? Recorded vote. So, Mr. Clerk, you have to do the dirty vote now. Okay, take the vote, please. Okay, and...
So a recorded vote. The question is to adjourn debate on the motion of Mr. Brunel Duceppe. Mr. Ali.
No.
No. Mr. Chang.
No.
Monsieur El Khoury. No. Ms. Zegowitz.
No.
Ms. Zaid.
No.
Mr. Kimmich.
No.
Mr. McGuire.
No.
Mr. McLean.
No.
Mr. Ridicop.
No.
Monsieur Brunel Duceppe.
No.
Ms. Kwan.
Yes.
Yeas 1, nays 10.
So,
the debate continue.
So now we will go to Mr. Chang for the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank my committee member Cross for bringing the motion forward. And I would like to make some friendly amendment to his motion.
Okay, please go ahead.
So in the first paragraph where it stops at policies, that to add that the study consists of no less than 4 meetings. That's at the first paragraph. Then at the last paragraph where it says that the committee prioritized the study, I would like to add alongside the international student study and the human smuggler / passport study, comma, that the committee, and that stops there. And the next change is after the House. It should say that at that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government tables a comprehensive report to the report.
Thank you. Now the debate on the amendment. I have MP Kwan.
Thank you very much.
Point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order.
Question de procédure.
Procedural question here. I believe that was a friendly amendment. So do I have to agree to it if it's a friendly amendment? All right, then. Well, I won't say anything.
MP Kwan.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Commenting then on the motion, I think it's interesting that the committee... Yeah, on the amendment to motion, which is accepted as a friendly amendment from what I gather from the mover. And so really, on the whole, there is intention for this committee to sort of bypass the stages in terms of engaging in debate around business of the committee. I note is interesting as well, Mr. Chair, that this happens quite a lot. From 2 meetings ago, we actually had a motion on the floor, and the motion, Mr. Chair, speaks to calling for the committee to undertake a study of no more than 2 meetings to examine the temporary public policy for to facilitate temporary residence visas for certain extended family affected by the crises in Gaza, including the challenges that the Government of Canada faces in facilitating the exit of Gazans, and that Canada is not the only country that faces these challenges.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order, MP Chang.
This is not relevant to the amendment that we have in the committee right now.
I would request the honourable member, MP Kwan, to come back to the speaking on the amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is relevant because we're talking about border measures. We're talking about implications of potential trafficking issues and to the desperation of people getting to safety. And the motion that I was debating, Mr. Chair, that I was raising exactly ties into that point. And that motion, Mr. Chair, if you allow me to finish, then I can actually complete my thought and my comments as it relates to the amendment and to the main motion.
Continue, please.
Thank you. To continue, it went on to say in that motion, and that Canada is not the only country that faces these challenges, that the study include examination of the development and execution of the Government of Canada's special immigration measures to reunite and help bring Canadian Gazan family members to safety, including extended family, that the committee also consider Canada's use of its diplomatic relations to help facilitate the free movement of persons authorized to travel to Canada, and that the committee consider testimony from affected families as well as Canadian civil society, that the committee invite the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship to appear for 1 hour with departmental officials, that departmental officials appear for an additional hour. There were amendments, Mr. Chair, to this motion as well. The motion then went on to say the committee invite other relevant witnesses in accordance with the usual practices of the committee. The amendments included were to
There's a
include...
point of order again, and MP Jahid.
We have the amendment which has been proposed by Mr. Chang on the motion by Mr. Brunel Dessep. So is this relevant to that amendment, because we need to debate the amendment?
MP Jahid, I'm trying to figure it out. If she's bringing in a motion, there cannot be 2 motions on the floor. If she's going to come back to the debate on the, if she's going to somehow relate what she's saying to the amendment to the motion, then I have to accept that, and that's where I asked the honourable member to come to the amendment, and she said that she's coming back to the amendment. So I have given her the opportunity to finish her, let her finish quickly, and see if she comes back to the amendment. If she does not, then I will stop her. But MP Kwan, floor with you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to finish my thought, despite the ongoing interruption from Liberal members. And so to my point, Mr. Chair, if I can finish my thought, the motion was then amended by the Conservatives to add Sudan to it, to which I wholeheartedly agree. Now, of course, I further had made an amendment to that motion to indicate that the committee ordered the production of all documents and records related to the policy-making consideration that led to the specific dimensions of the temporary public policy that opened on January 9th, 2024, including the 1,000-person cap, the gradual issuance of access codes and delays in receiving codes experienced by many applicants, and the information requested from the applicants on additional screening forms that, while respecting Section 19, Section 23, and Section 69 of the Access to Information Act, these details to be provided within 30 days of adoption of this motion, and relevant documents are released in full to the public. And then the motion goes on to say that the committee reports its finding to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to the report. That was actually paused, and then because we ran out of time, and then, of course, we have not been able to come back to debate this motion, which absolutely should be. How does this actually tie to the amendment at hand, Mr. Chair? Because we're all talking about the grave situation with respect to our borders. Borders that tie into the United States, of course, now with the Trump administration and what those implications might be. And then I think borders also in other countries as well. In the situation with Gazans, they have not been able to get to safety. Many of them have been subject to trafficking as well. I think many of them have been subject to having to actually pay exorbitant fees and bribery in order to stay safe. All of that has implications for borders, and including the Canadian border as well. And so it's interesting to know that in this amendment and in this main motion, Mr. Chair, it excludes that community and the implications for them and what the hardships that they have to face. Mr. Chair, if we really want to look at the implications of trafficking and what it means in terms of border control and so on, we should actually be looking at this community as well, Mr. Chair. But, we consistently and persistently refuse to do so, and we allow for the continuation of these atrocities to take place. And community members have actually come before this committee in a dire situation. In fact, as they wait for the government to do what is necessary to move forward, and to fix the problem, to facilitate the process. Instead of doing that, what the government has done is to create further barriers. In the meantime, family members have come before the committee, have indicated that their loved one have passed, that their loved one has not been able to get to safety as they try to manage through the many, many barriers, whether it's be Gazans, or even in the Lebanese community. You have to ask the question, what's going on with the Lebanese community, where the government refuses to even bring forward a special immigration measure so that Canadian loved ones, Canadian family members with loved ones in Lebanon would be able to access to get to safety. How is it even possible that the Canadian government would not consider that? How is it even possible that the Canadian government, for example, would tell a Canadian family member in that dire situation that they have to leave their spouse and their child behind because they are not Canadians, because they do not have PR status? To tell, if I was told as a Canadian, stuck in a situation like that in Lebanon, let's say, and my child is there and my spouse is there, and I'm told that I have to leave them behind in that dangerous situation, and we think it's okay. I don't think any of us would think that it is okay. And why is it that the Canadian government would not move forward to bring a special immigration measure to expedite, to bring to safety those family members, to allow those Canadian family members to bring their children and their spouse to Canada? But yet this persists and continues in certain countries, in certain approaches. The Canadian government continues to do this, continues to allow for this to happen. So if we're going to be studying a study on border measures, then we should be examining this as well. Why is there differential treatment for different countries? Some have already said this, that perhaps it's because of the color of their skin. Is it? I don't know. Now, IRCC actually has a history of discrimination and discriminatory practices. That has been shown before. Reports have indicated as such. Is this an ongoing perpetuation of that from this government? Should we not then include these elements as part of the study, Mr. Chair? You know, but we often just, I don't know what it is, turn a blind eye, perhaps, or just leave those issues aside as though somehow it is not crucial or critical for this committee to examine. I don't understand it. I really don't. I don't understand the practice and the approach here. I don't understand the cavalier response from the government. I like to think that I'm wrong. I hope to think that I'm wrong. However, the practice has been consistent from the government. It continues on. And it doesn't matter how dire the situation is. And at the end of the day, lives do matter. Lives do matter. And I wonder why, in this whole conversation, with this amendment, with this motion, there's no discussion about whether or not the United States is actually a safe third country now, in light of what's happened, in light of what we've learned from the previous Trump administration and their practices, where they separated child and parent, where they put children in cages. I have even heard that some of those children have not reunited with their loved ones. Why are we not having that conversation at this committee?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I very much appreciate the heartfelt comments.
Sorry, MP Jerowitz said I'll consider your point of order, but before I consider your point of order, because it's already 5:30, so I'm going to release the witnesses because this seems like this discussion is going forever. So on behalf of the committee members, I would like to thank the witnesses that has come to the committee to share information and help us with this. So thank you, and you are released. You can go, and now I have to entertain a point of order from MP Jerowitz. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say I appreciate the caring comments of my colleague. I just don't know what the relevance is to the motion changes that my colleague has made. My sense is that she does not support it, and she would like to sort of, I don't know if she's trying to add things to it. I don't think we could consider two motions at the same time. We'll have to just deal with the motion, which is the addition to the current motion at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MP Jerowitz. So we will go to MP Kwan because she has the floor, and she's not bringing in this as a second motion on the floor. She's speaking to the amendment to the motion, and we have resources till 5:45. So if you fellows don't come up with a conclusion till 5:45, then I have to basically make a decision at my own to either adjourn or suspend the meeting. So I will give the floor to MP Kwan. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As I was saying earlier, with respect to the situation in the United States, when we first saw the Trump administration came to office, actually, I remember this very well. It was in January, and I was newly elected, actually, to the House of Commons, and being the immigration critic for the NDP. I moved an emergency debate in the House of Commons with that situation, and which was ultimately granted because of the dire situation that's there, the discriminatory practices that the Trump administration had attempted to bring into play. And to impact the Muslim community, as an example, with their immigration policy. The policy, as we saw play out, was devastating. There was no question about it. Where people were separated, as I indicated, from their loved ones, where children were separated. They were put in cages, if you can just imagine. Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, there's a change of chairs. And so, there was that kind of approach taken to impact the lives of people. There were toddlers that were separated from their parents, Mr. Chair. There were situations where I have been informed where the child has not yet been reunited with their loved ones, been reunited with their parents, that they've actually been lost in the system. So now, fast forward to today, what do we have? We have the Trump administration winning the election, and we all heard during the campaign period what he said. He actually called immigrants, migrants, the poison to the blood system of the United States. I sure hope that that's not what we're thinking here in Canada, but you can imagine the rhetoric, the toxic description of migrants in the United States from the Trump administration and what that might mean, and what the implications are for people who look like me, immigrants in that country. What it would mean for them. And now, of course, they're holding Canada hostage in some ways with respect to immigration policies and to trade and the implications around trade. But, nowhere in time, I have not heard from anyone around this committee, not from the government, not from the minister, not from anyone, to talk about, given the changing circumstances in the United States, given the record of the Trump administration, of Trump himself, actually, from his previous administration, whether or not the United States is a safe country for migrants. That is a real question that should be had, Mr. Chair.
One moment, Ms. Kwan. Just checking, MP Jurwitz, did you have a point of order, or did you just want to be on the speaking list? Just want to clarify that.
I want to be on the speaking list. Thank you.
Okay, you're on the list. That's there. Thank you. Go ahead, MP Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And so you have to wonder about that, whether or not the United States is still a safe third country. You have to ask the question of not only just ourselves, but I think of the international community as well. I think that we have a responsibility as parliamentarians. We have a responsibility as, I think, what I like to think as a country that is compassionate, a country that puts the lives of people, the human rights of people ahead of all else, not just for cheap politics, for political gain, because all too often I feel like what goes on around this table, what goes on around the theatrics of Parliament and with parliamentarians is simply just about the politics of things. But stripping down all of those pieces, we have to see the faces behind these policies. Why else are we here? I hope that we're here because we want to actually create a better world. I hope that we are here because Canada has a role to play in the face of this kind of regression and attack on the migrant and immigrant community. Canada is a country that relied on the immigrant community to create and build this country. I still recall in the history books, in learning about the contributions of the Chinese migrant workers, where we were brought here to Canada, not because we were wanted, but because we were a source of cheap labor. And we were brought into this country to build the railway, to connect the West Coast with the rest of the country from coast to coast to coast. And the Chinese migrant workers were brought in to do the most dangerous jobs, and they were paid the least amount of money, and they faced discrimination, and many of them died in that process. Many of them died in that process, Mr. Chair. And, you know, where are we today? We say we recognize history, we apologize for the horrific treatment and discriminatory practices of the past, but yet we perpetuate the situation. We allow for it to continue. In many ways, one might actually say today's immigration stream, particularly with the low-wage stream, with a closed work permit, is a modern-day program of the past, of how people are being treated. And yet we have to live through it over and over again. And here we are once again. It's like as though time stood still and we learned nothing. So now with the current situation with the United States, I think we can all anticipate what might be coming to this sense, that people in the United States might have fear in their hearts. And whether they are a migrant or a person with status or without status, can you imagine being told by the president-elect that you are the poison of that country? How that makes a person feel? Do you feel like you belong in that country? I would think not, Mr. Chair. I would think that the government of the day is sending a clear message that migrants, immigrants are not welcome. In fact, I think they are denigrating the people and their contributions to the United States. And some people might feel like they don't belong and they might need to leave. Now, on that question, isn't there a real question about whether or not the United States is a safe third country? Isn't there a real question for not just Canada to consider that, but rather for the international community to consider that? I would even venture to say that the UNHCR needs to be considering that as well, Mr. Chair. The United States, with their approach, I believe at this juncture, is not a particularly safe country. Not for migrants, not for immigrants, not for newcomers. They're told that they don't belong. They're told that they're the poison of the bloodstream of Americans. Can you imagine? That's not too dissimilar in some ways, though, the kind of message that the Canadian government is sending, what the Prime Minister is saying. Basically, the government has actually put out ads to tell asylum seekers about the application process to seek asylum. I don't necessarily think that the intention behind that is to inform people what the approach ought to be, but rather it is to scare people away from making an asylum claim, Mr. Chair. That's what I think is going on. So in some ways, Canada has picked up that narrative, that mentality that the United States, the Trump administration is bringing forward. And that's, to me, just absolutely devastating. I never thought that I would live to see that day here in Canada. I don't. I never thought that I would hear the Prime Minister say that migrant workers is a tap that should be turned off, that immigrants is a tap that should be turned off, as though we're some sort of weirdos that don't belong in this country, as though somehow we don't contribute to the Canadian society, as though somehow we are just an economic unit, that we're not real people with real lives, with real family, who's made Canada their home, who's contributed in building this country. That is the mentality that's forthcoming. And I have experienced lots of discrimination in my life. I have always thought that perhaps it would stop with my generation. My grandparents experienced it. People pushed him off the bus, my granddad. You know, he's passed now, and he used to tell me these stories of what he experienced. My parents experienced it. I experienced it. I never thought that my children would experience it. And yes, they did. My daughter, just coming out of COVID on the way to school on a bus, she was spat on. She was spat on, and racial slurs were yelled at her to an 18-year-old. I desperately do not want to see this happen, not here in Canada, not in my family, not for anyone else. We often in this House get together and we say that we will not stand for hate, we will not stand for discrimination, we will fight against it. So where is that courage now, Mr. Chair? When we see the President-elect of the United States calling immigrants and migrants during the campaign the poison of the United States bloodstream, do we think that is acceptable? Do we not think that perpetuates hate? And now what are we talking about around this table? How to secure a border. For people who are not wanted, who are mistreated in that way, we're talking about building a wall. Not dissimilar to the wall that the Trump administration in the first term wanted to build, a physical one, but Canada wanted to build, and Canada did build an invisible wall with the Safe Third Country Agreement by extending it further and further.
Sorry to interrupt, MP Kwan. We'll come back to this, and meeting suspended for now.